Welcome to Wellness Radio with Dr. Jeanette Gallagher as your host. Her show discusses topics of health, wellness, and spirituality, and is about discovering your place in this great universe, from your cells to the cosmos. Along with her guests, in casual conversation, she strives to ask the difficult questions that may be holding you back from a vibrant life, and shares new ideas that may inspire you to make a change in your life that you only can see in your dreams. And now, here is Dr. Jeanette Gallagher.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Wellness Radio. This is Dr. Jeanette Gallagher, and it's a pleasure to have you with us here this evening. Tonight, we are going to be talking about gemstones, our connection to those little glimmers of light that we see in the ground, in the earth. What has Mother Earth been saving and protecting all of these years and all of these centuries? We start to dig them up and we say, this is a gem. This is something for me. I can connect with it. What we'll be talking about today is about the power of gemstones. What are they about? How can we connect with them? What are their stories in past lives? Do they have a mythical, mystical, and magical connection? What is their sense that we can draw into our spiritual life at this time and say, I feel a connection with this when I hold this stone? Many times people will say, oh, I don't know. I have a lot of gemstones on the counter. I don't know. I just kind of like how they look, and I put them over there. They're good to go. Others, they're cleansing them. They are holding them, meditating with them, connecting with them, and also using them to really take a journey through meditation and be able to say, this is something I deeply connect with, and it's something that is giving me a sense of comfort. It's connecting me to the higher realms, and even still, it just feels good. Today, my guest is Nicholas Pearson. His book is The Seven Archetypal Stones, Their Spiritual Powers and Teachings. Nicholas, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jeanette. The pleasure is all mine.
Oh, it's so great to have you, Nicholas, especially in these times. You know, we say there's a lot of fear out there. There's a lot of chaos. Sometimes people are saying, let's just raise our vibration. We're good to go. And others are saying, I don't know where I am, and I feel like I'm lost. And don't you think that when we talk about gemstones, it's a great place to start with a new connection?
Totally. You know, they've existed for eons. They've weathered many different things in Earth's history. I think they can teach us how to do the same thing on a smaller scale. Yeah,
I think there's a lot of people that are saying, let's get a few gemstones. And they kind of like, as I said in the beginning, they kind of toss them on the counter and they forget about them. You know, others have them with them all the time and they almost want to tape them to their being, or they tie them around their waist. Don't you think there's really a lot of people, and how you connect with the gemstone is where we can start talking about today?
Yeah, you know, the name of the game here is about intentional relationship, and I think you hit the nail on the head when you said that there are some people who just kind of get them and put them around their space, maybe even tuck them into a pocket, but don't think about it any deeper than that. And, you know, I liken it to making a new acquaintance out there in the world. You meet someone at a party, you go to an event, you become Facebook friends. And if that's all you invest in that relationship, when you really need them, let's say you got to move, or, you know, you need someone to help you when you're ill or injured, the first person you go to is not that passing acquaintance you made at one time. You go to someone that you've forged relationship with, that you've shown up for, who has shown up for you, that you've built that history with. And it kind of needs to be the same thing with our stones. So it's not about just picking a beautiful piece of jewelry to wear, or finding a great accent stone to you know, bring out the colors of your space if you're decorating with them, but showing up and doing the work in an intentional, conscientious, and relational kind of sense.
Yeah, you know, I have a lot of gemstones. Well, I won't say a lot because we know some people can have a whole lot. They've got them everywhere. But I probably have like maybe 20, and they're very small. They're not large, and they're almost as if, I call them sort of like fairy dust in the night. That's how I think of them. In other words, I can connect to them casually. I know they're there for just to be able to have that connection. And one day I was cleaning. It was before full moon time, and I was going to put them outside on the patio, and I kind of just thought about it, picked up an empty glass vase, put them all inside. As soon as my first hand let go and they hit the bottom of the glass vase, it exploded everywhere. I said, whoops, I guess you don't need to be cleansed or energized. You have enough energy already, And I think sometimes we don't even think about that. And what happened was they just hit the glass and they were so energized they just kind of like blew it. I mean, like it went everywhere. And I think the idea is, how can something just as a gemstone even have energy inside of it? And what is that connection? Can we talk about the energy for a second? What is it? How can some people connect to it and how others don't even notice it, right? Obviously, my vase knew it. It said, hey, I'm good to go, right?
Yeah, sure. Well, let's start with what is energy, period. Energy is the force, or almost the currency required to achieve an outcome. So whether that's the metabolic energy that our body derives from eating food, that it turns into fuel for us to live and breathe and move and grow and heal, whether that's the sunlight that fuels plants, or whether it's the fossil fuels in our cars, but there's so many different forms of energy. And the energy that we can kind of at least make parallels to when it comes to crystal energy falls into the spectrum that we call the electromagnetic spectrum. So this includes visible light and X-rays and radio waves and all sorts of other things. But this energy is created by systems that vibrate, things that move. And here's the thing about all of the matter that we can see and touch and feel and hear and taste, and even lots of matter that we can't. It's all doing this dance of ecstatic motion. So down to the tiniest subatomic particle, all of the universe is dancing, is vibrating, is generating an electromagnetic field as a result of that dance. So everything around us is generating energy, responds to energy, and is informed by energy. So if we look at that in a system like you and me, our bodies, and compare that to crystal energy, there's a really big difference. Crystals have this really ordered, regular structure, and that results in a very ordered and predictable and structured energy field, whereas we don't necessarily have that. Every cell, every tissue, every organ of the body has a different function, has a different rhythm, is engaged in a different purpose. And when you kind of add all of that up together, all the parts and pieces of us don't necessarily become a coherent whole every day of the week. Our energy field is super malleable. It's influenced by what we're thinking, who we're talking to, where we are, what we can smell, the colors, the sights, the sounds around us, what we ate, what we're worried about, what we're hopeful about. Every tiny little influence in our lives affects the sort of net results of what's happening in our electromagnetic field. A crystal, on the other hand, we pick up a piece of quartz, and it is always just trying to be quartz. And so that perfect order that it has teaches us how to be similarly ordered, how to get in touch with our most fundamental truth of who and what we are, and helps us learn to express that in our everyday life.
Because if we're truly, it's almost like you look at it, we have this chaos, well, we'll use it as chaos, or we'll call it disorder or entropy or harmony or whatever. In other words, the body is over here. And then when you pick up a crystal, it does something to draw you in to focus. It connects you on a certain frequency level, and it brings you into a little bit more of sense of calmness or quietness or resonation, so to speak. Sometimes we say, is the energy of our being going into the crystal, or is the crystal bringing us into focus? Sometimes people will say, oh, my crystals must be really dark. I've been feeling crappy lately. Let me give it to the crystal. Do you know what I mean? Or the crystal, is it doing it in reverse? Because a lot of times people will say, oh, I haven't been feeling good. I've been really, giving a lot of my stuff and doing a lot of crystal work, and I need to cleanse them because they must be holding all the bad stuff I've been giving out. There's a lot of miscommunication and communication, and how does that actually work?
I think like all things, it's a two-way street. So if we look at how crystal lattices, anything that's crystalline, so it doesn't necessarily have to be a beautiful gemstone. It can be the crystals in our body or the little bits of gypsum in the drywall in our home. But anything with a crystal structure has several basic functions. And chief among them is the fact that they retain memory. They have an imprint. They can kind of hold on to an echo of whatever energy fields they come into contact with. So when we talk about cleansing crystals of their energy in particular, what we're talking about is not necessarily good energy or bad energy. Imagine, the crystal is like a chalkboard on your wall, and every experience that it comes into contact with, it takes note of it on that chalkboard. Eventually, you run out of space on the board. You can't write anything intelligible on there. Plus, if you're trying to maybe work on a particular lesson or theme or goal, if that chalkboard is full of so many other things, they're not all necessarily aligned with the goal that you're aiming toward. So the goal of cleansing is to wipe that slate clean so we can maybe instill our focus, whether that's by talking to the crystal or listening to what it has to say to us. That's up to you and your relationship with the stone for that particular task in mind.
Don't you think that sometimes that's really a great, in a way, to be able to help release emotions sometimes? Because when you do it with others, you kind of find that interaction, it has a memory also in the other person and in you as well, but it kind of gets recalled. Do you know what I mean? And when you're doing it the gemstone's purpose is not to recall and say, hey, this is what you've got on the board here. Let's revisit that today. In other words, it doesn't spew back at you all of the stuff that you've put there. Where sometimes the interaction with humans, it does spew back at you what you put there or what you've given out or given back. In other words, the interaction is always of recall. So does a gemstone call up that old history sometimes, things that you've released or worked with it that is on the board as you shared? Does it call up and say, oh, but hey, what about this? Or hey, what about that? Do you know what I mean? Like judgment, negativity, dark energy, sadness, grief, all of these other things that you may be working with. Is the recall getting spewed back at you when you work with a gemstone versus when you work with a human?
Well, here's the thing. To a crystal, none of those energies are inherently good or bad. They're just there. Their role as the record keeper is essentially to record and replay. So if in reflecting that back to us, we experience something as we'll say, less than positive experience that doesn't give us that sort of warm and fuzzy vibe, that's really on us. One of those other sort of essential roles that all crystals have is to work as both reflectors and refractors. They're prisms and lenses. So they kind of help us learn to hone the focus, first by reflecting back to us what might be underneath that sort of, we'll say, the psychological rug where we sweep all the dust so we don't have to see it. And some crystals are really adept at that. This book, the Seven Archetypal Stones, opens with obsidian. And although obsidian is not truly crystalline, it's crystal-like in a lot of ways. But this is the stone that is the master of reflection. So when we have that stuff that maybe we've decided not to focus on for whatever reason, we've swept it under the rug, we think we're over it, we're just trying to have a better focus on any given day. One of the roles of obsidian is to be that really honest friend with no filter. Now, there's no judgment, but there's also no filter. Obsidian holds up the mirror and says, hey, look at this. Look at this area of you that has an opportunity to heal. And sometimes that's, a place of empowerment. And sometimes for us, if it's really we'll say an area of in great need of very personal healing, sometimes it doesn't feel pleasant. So because crystals don't have human egos, expectations, or judgments that are derived from within, the things they can reveal to us don't always necessarily feel good. And that's why it's our job to do the work, to keep ourselves nice and clear and clean, and to show up ready to do the work with crystals with integrity, with honesty, with transparency. So that way when they hold up the mirror, we're ready, willing, and able to look a little bit deeper.
So would not obsidian be something you would start with if you're starting to release some emotions or starting to come into contact and saying, this is the first place to begin?
For me, obsidian is a stone of initiation for so many reasons.
Right.
The reason it is the first stone in this book is because if we're not willing to be honest with ourselves on our spiritual path, there's no point taking the first step. So it really shows up to help us kind of cut through the BS of life. One of obsidian's other roles is through this sort of archetype of the spear, the arrow point, the knife blade. It has this sharpness to it that hones the mind to be similarly incisive. And then we can kind of cut through the excess mental chatter, through the excess baggage. Then when it's time to hold the mirror up in front of our face, when it has that archetypal role of the mirror, we can do that with less pain, with less baggage, because we've learned to let go of the extraneous. We've learned to really have the laser-like focus. And that's incredible because obsidian is so gifted in showing us not to worry about the broken pieces that are falling, but to look at what's revealed when we sort of carve away the consciousness to reveal the masterpiece inside.
And then next you talk about jade and about masks. Many who have been on the spiritual journey have said, I had to let everything go. I'm not as I was before. It took a long time to be able to shed all that I thought I was, that illusion. Almost if we look back in history, we probably would not have done that in the 50s, 60s, 70s, or 80s because we were still creating our illusion. So do you think that sometimes the idea of working with maybe jade and working on your mask or the illusion or identity, is that not just something that now we are able to do it on a much bigger scale? In other words, people are starting to understand it and they are more, I guess, I won't say the word mentally, what's the word? They're more open and aware to be able to understand these concepts. Do you think we could have done that maybe decades before?
I think the human potential is something that is relatively universal. The circumstances around us change from every era, every decade, but the fundamental impulse of being human is something that we have had since the beginning of time and will have until the end of time, or at least until the next chapter, whatever that looks like. So, if we look at the archaeological record, jade is literally carved into these masks, into items that were used to kind of represent the death or transcendence of one state of being into the next. And because that is one of the gifts of the stone, I think it's a normal human impulse to want to wear the mask, to have the persona that we adopt and maybe kind of confuse for the real us. But jade so elegantly helps us peel those masks away, helps us to kind of be prepared to stop identifying with the ego, let the ego be a tool in the toolbox instead of the tool that uses us. And I think, I hesitate to make broad pronouncements. I think that there are lots of people waking up to the reality and the possibility of that today. But if we look at the world at large, we see a lot of misidentification with ego. We see a lot of things like, narcissism and, all these other strong patterns in people's personalities that I can't say that we have a larger or smaller percentage of people on one end of the spectrum or the other, because I think it's such a universal human experience to go through these highs and lows of exploring identity.
Yeah, I always think of jade. I'm in my 60s, so I think of jade as an elder wisdom woman. Do you know what I mean? In other words, it's almost like definitely over the age of 60, definitely not one that has to have a lot of fit and flair, not someone who needs to be the belle of the ball, so to speak. It's almost as if elegance in silence or elegance in wisdom. Do you know what I mean? I always think of jade as that.
Absolutely. If any stone could have poise, it might be jade.
Right, yeah. What I was sharing with you before we had spoken about this on the show is that I picked up the book, and usually it's intuitive where I will go. And, of course, I went right to lapis. And I went right to the page, and it says Gemstone of Heaven. And I think a lot of times people are saying they're feeling a sense of being lost. They want to go home. They feel like they want to be in that spiritual being, and it's sort of like, can we ever get out of this human existence? And, what's next? What's next? Let's go. And a lot of people wanting to sprout their wings, so to speak. Don't you think lapis might be something to read in your book? Again, the book is the Seven Archetypal Stones, and it's really, when you share about lapis, it's almost as if you're feeling, oh, can I just bathe in this stuff? Maybe I just want to carve a little hole and I'll sit in the bathtub of it. Yes. Yeah. It's sort of like it almost seems to. It just feels like, that's me, yes?
Yeah, lapis has been a really profound ally and teacher for me personally. I find that on the one hand, there is a strictness with this stone, but only because it wants the best for you, like a really loving parent or guide that you'd have on your journey. And one of Lapis's missions is to help us remember our celestial origins. And that means we kind of have to, cut out the crud in our lives, stop being so attached to the mundane, not necessarily to divorce ourselves from it, but to learn how to have a better perspective. And the first gift of this stone is the gift of perspective. Imagine that you could ascend to those starry heavens. The stone itself looks like the night sky, golden stars against a deep blue background. It's the perfect stone to kind of illustrate this image. But imagine if you could rise up to that height and then look down at life from a new perspective. Be able to see more than just what's right in front of you. The whole picture would reveal itself before your eyes. And that's what lapis can afford to us. It can offer this really great gift of getting in touch with the bigger picture, seeing how our life is not just a sequence of events in one order, but how it represents the whole arc of our evolutionary path.
Yeah, because I think many of us who are starseeds, or we are angels ascended, or all of these others we're all in this higher vibration, so to speak. In other words, we truly have been working through our spiritual, gifts and paths, and we say, we've been flying up here forever. Can you all get it together down there? That's almost how we feel. On an energetic daily basis. I think many times people are saying, I feel really good there. That's what I feel. That's what I know. And then when they are engaging and going to the store and, hey, Walmart doesn't feel so good, or, oh, gosh, do you really mean I need to go to the doctor's a visit? And, and things just don't feel right. I think sometimes when you can connect with a gemstone, such as maybe lapis, you would say, maybe I can just keep my piece of home with me, on me, with me, carry it with me, and maybe you can bridge that gap of over there and here. I think that sometimes is it almost an interdimensional kind of gemstone? In other words, bringing us into all of these dimensions together?
I think maybe that's one way we could interpret it. I think for me personally, the most profound gift that lapis gives me in sort of an immediate sense is the unification of the heart and the mind. Mm-hmm. And especially here in the West, we imagine that there's a sort of invisible barrier between the two. One sits on one shelf, another is on the other, and there the two shall mix. And when we work with a stone like this, when it promotes that state of complete and utter harmonization of our heart and mind, it actually resembles, concepts that are found, especially in Eastern cultures. For example, if you go to Japan or China, they have one word that means both heart and mind. And this stone brings the two together. Now, when we work within to remove whatever barriers we've got to experience a state of inner unity or inner harmony, that manifests itself in the outside world. And it can help us with that illusion of separation. It's the idea that I am totally separate from you just because my ego looks at it and goes, well, we've got totally different geography. We can get as close as we want to in the third dimension, and we will never be one being. But a lot of those laws that we see illustrated on the material plane are almost like the exact inverse of what actually drives the spiritual plane. So when we come from that inner state of unity, where we might otherwise look and find separation in the material plane, we instead find our spiritual connection. And I think this stone is so great for maybe exercising greater compassion because it allows us the gift of perspective where we can see the innate connection. We can go into those terrifying places, the grocery stores and supermarkets of the world where humanity might not be exemplifying its very best all the time. And instead we find that spark, that divinity that's within us all, because we're all from the same place, from the same source, the same spark of divine consciousness.
It's so funny when you just said that. It reminded me, so many times, I've been on the radio for 10 years, and I've always shared this, but I haven't shared it lately, and maybe this is a good time. When I go into Walmart, the best way to go into Walmart is to go in the opposite way. Go in the exit. And you will find yourself going counterintuitive to everybody. You know how when you go into the right, everybody kind of like follows a pattern going up and down the aisles, and nobody quite knocks into each other. But what you do is you go in the exit, and you go in the opposite way, and you're every single aisle, you're off key. But what you do is you bump into people, and you say, oh, my goodness, hi, how are you? Sorry I did that. And what you will find is elders, that maybe don't have anyone to talk to, and no one ever said hello to them. They kind of meandered through Walmart and never talked to anybody. But if you go in the wrong way, you can speak to so many other people and connect to so many other souls that you would have never thought about. And when you go in the wrong way, you always find someone who's struggling or someone who says, oh, gosh, yeah, and they start talking to you, and I'll say, oh, I just bumped into you today. I thought our carts were just going to have a dance. And then they smile. I think the idea is, how can you create connectedness no matter where you are in any realm? In other words, do we always have to be on the white side, the white light people? Or can we go into Walmart and bump into it and share our light there? Isn't that surely what we're talking about, is how can we interact with gemstones and still carry on our day-to-day life? And, hey, yeah, I know the kids, the kids in the car, we got it, So how do we bring all of this together and still be able to create a great day? Don't you think?
Yeah, this is really the kind of conversation that leads us toward authentic growth. Our spiritual practice is not something we do behind closed doors on a good day with our most expensive gemstone and our highest quality incense in the pure temple that we've created. Our real spiritual practice is what we do when we are stuck in traffic and late for the meeting, when we miss the important call, when, we bump into someone in the grocery store by mistake or not. That's our opportunity. And, the gift of the mineral kingdom, when we hold that piece of lapis has the same fundamental resonance in every single one of those situations. Because unlike our biological and psychological makeup, it's not subject to the kind of change that we are. So when we connect to crystals of any variety, the humblest of rocks on the side of the road to the most beautiful gemstones and mineral specimens like we see in, museums, their goal is to remind us to be more like them, to be more crystalline, to be more coherent and regular. And that's not to say that we forsake autonomy and spontaneity, but that we hold our own crystalline vibration through every walk of life.
Right. Let's talk about emerald for a second. And when you talk about emerald, I always think of, as magic, of mystery. A lot of times, on children's shows, you will see the green mist, where you'll always see a green emerald. And people will say, oh, that's magic. I think we learn that from a very young age, that seems to be, the alchemist. It's something different. It's unique. And when we think about that, we think of it can change form. It can be something else. You can always change your perception. You can always change your beliefs. You can always dance among possibilities. Isn't that what emerald's all about, is dancing among the possibilities?
Emerald really is a magical stone. I'm currently kind of undergoing a new phase of my relationship with emerald. It's a stone that in the last year or so has really called to me. I did the bulk of writing for this book in 2015, 2014 I started it. So it's been a while since I've really come back to the basics of it. So I'm experiencing emeralds through a new lens. And in the book, I talk a lot about emeralds through the sort of alchemical language of symbols, the emerald tablet of Hermes Trismegistus, the Holy Grail, which was said to have been an emerald that fell from the sky. And when we really deepen our connection to emerald, those things certainly hold true, but there's so much more to it. I think that, the archetype of the tablet is our instruction, the set of directions for performing the alchemical act. The grail is the crucible in which that internal alchemy takes place. But there's something so much more. Emerald reminds us that the heart itself is the vessel, the crucible in which our own personal alchemy takes place. But the real magic is a magic that is derived from the exaltation of love itself. And we can only do that when we're willing to take our light into the dimmest of places and allow that love, that light, that power to transform us.
Absolutely interesting. I think, Nicholas, that when we are talking about these gemstones, what we're really sharing today is how we have experienced their dance and how we have connected with a story to share forward. Don't you think when you're talking about gemstones, you're really sharing stories that have come up in the past from many eons before, and that's where our connections seem to be derived from. In other words, someone may come up and say, well, this is a stone and this is how I feel about it and this is how I connect with it. Might that story be something different for them? In other words, all of the stories that you share in your book is a basis to start from, and then you create your own connection. It's not meant to be that everyone finds the same connection. It's meant to be this is how the story has been in history, and you now create your own experience or your own very much story, how you want to be with that stone, yes?
I think that's maybe about half true, because the goal here is the effects will vary, but the mechanism is the same. And right. the gift of spending a whole book focused on 7 stones instead of several hundred stones like we usually find, is that it allows us to find the common thread from story to story, from culture to culture. From these 7 stones, we see that there is a certain amount of universality, and that's what makes them archetypal. You don't have to be a resident of one culture in one era to receive the benefit of the wisdom of that stone and be able to get that archetypal context. It's something that transcends, the bounds of time and space and culture and language and history. And so much of our crystal literature is hyper-focused on results. It's prescriptive. Carry this crystal to heal that condition. Or, wear this gemstone to bring this set of circumstances to you. But what we're failing to do is to look at what's driving that. Because if I take the same gemstone and apply it to 10 different people, I will probably get 10 slightly different sets of results because the same mechanism is being applied to 10 different sets of baggage. My baggage isn't like anyone else's on Earth, and neither is yours or any of our listeners. So we have to do more than work past the prescriptive level of effect and start to find the common cause. And so I think one of my reasons that I really dug deep into these 7 stones was to find those sort of universal threads. How those things blossom in your life will surely be unique, and it's definitely highly dependent on your personal relationship with them. But when we strip past just the effect level and look for cause, then we find something universal.
Right, because I think sometimes people will say, I hear this all the time. Patients will come to me and they'll say, okay, well, what does it fix? What is it going to, quote, do for me? And always my answer is, I don't know what it's going to do for you, but I know that, it's something to dance with. It's something that seems to be maybe on purpose. Sometimes I think the idea is that we go to the store and we say, I'm going to take vitamin C because it's going to fix my cold. I'm going to, do some rubbing alcohol because it's going to get rid of all my bacteria in my bathroom. Do you know what I mean? Or I think the idea is we believe that A plus B is going to get to C all the time. if we think about it, really is A has a million different variables, so does C, and it's totally dependent upon the reaction. It's, if you think back at chemistry, I had a few too many courses, A plus B, and it has an arrow and it goes to C. There's so many variables in there. Even the catalyst over the arrow of, getting to C, it depends on all of those variables too. So I think the idea is that when you share about a gemstone, you're sharing so many different stories, as you said, so many different rituals and magic and mystery and everything that's been out there, and how we draw it all together and then create our experience is our own creation of our own engagement with it. In other words, if we say something is going to help you connect with heaven, okay, and your heaven may be different than my heaven, and we'll say, oh, but I didn't connect to it. Is your heaven, when you go through the Golden Gates and then you're in the clouds? Well, that's not right for a million or bazillion other people. It may be right for the few people that are around you that you're engaged in the conversation. So it depends on what is your context, where you're coming from, and then how you can dance with your beliefs, don't you think?
Yeah, definitely our baggage is part of that equation.
Right. It shades it, yes. And don't you think shading it is sometimes what's over that arrow, It's what you bring into context and whether or not you'll connect. Let's talk for a second about amethyst. You share about the violet flame. And, amethyst is pretty much, it's out there all the time on HSN and QVC. They sell a lot of it, People want to put it around their neck. And there's a lot of talk in the spiritual community about Saint Germain. So can you share a little bit about amethyst and its connections?
Sure. So amethyst is a violet-colored member of the quartz group, so it is the mineral species quartz with a few spare ions that just kind of worked their way in, mostly of iron, that give it that, really lush color. Mm-hmm. So amethyst starts fundamentally by kind of highlighting our most limiting patterns. That's the mechanism that's at play. And then it gives us the spiritual fuel that we need to transcend them. So in one sense, that sort of highlighting of our limiting patterns is the archetype of temperance. If we go back to the days of Greece and Rome, and even a little earlier, this stone became popular because, back then, wine was made mostly from red grapes, and they used to store it in containers that were not water safe. So they had to line the insides of their earthenware amphora with tar, and their wine itself had a much higher alcohol content, and it was strong stuff. And then it took on the flavor of tar. So when you served wine, you had to have someone who was an expert in mixing it with water and honey to make it palatable and also affordable. So there was this legend that if you served wine out of an amethyst goblet, you never got drunk. The reason for this is you could really water down someone's beverage, and they'd never know by the color of the glass that you'd done this. So they could drink and drink and drink and never deplete your stores. So it took on this reputation of being a stone against intoxication, and that's where its name comes from. Amethystine means not intoxicated in Greek, and that's where we get amethystos and later amethyst. So it's not about necessarily literally imbibing alcohol, but what are the patterns, the behaviors, the beliefs, not just the substances that we imbibe that hold us back, that keep us limited in some way. Amethyst allows those to be kind of under the spotlight to give us the impetus we need to transform them. Now, the fuel it provides to do that, we could say, is the violet flame itself. Mm-hmm. And the violet flame is that tool of spiritual alchemy that literally transmutes from one state to the next. It's, lead into gold, water into wine. So it takes those limiting factors and instead of making them challenges or obstacles, turns them into opportunities. It takes negativity and transforms it into positivity. It takes ill health and turns it into, perfect health. It's this amazing tool. And because amethyst is, at the very least, the current carrier of the violet ray, that sort of archetype of that sort of spiritual connection, of ceremony, of magic, of transformation, then the light that it embodies transforms itself into the violet flame to help us with those practices of spiritual alchemy.
You also talk, we have two more quartz And then we also have diamond. When you talk about quartz, a lot of times people will say, put it around your house in the four corners. It'll suck out all the negative energy. And, and when it comes around to full moon time, just put it outside. It'll clear it all out and then do it again. Do you think that quartz is something that will, people will say, I kind of just do it in passive times. But yet quartz is really a very important stone, and it really talks about power, yes?
Quartz is really the cornerstone of the modern crystal healing movement. If we look at the sort of earlier texts that were available in our modern era, where they're almost entirely focused on quartz and quartz family minerals. And when we look at the forerunners of what is today practiced by millions of people, people like Katrina Raphael and Marcel Vogel and other people that were writing in those time frames, they focused on quartz because it was, one, ubiquitous. It was everywhere. It was affordable. That goes up and down over the decades. And it was powerful. There is this really interesting sympathetic resonance between quartz and us. And it becomes kind of the stone and the foundation, if you will, of our entire practice. So much of what we could accomplish just with quartz, that it is astounding. And then on top of that, if we start to look at non-crystalline or non-macrocrystalline varieties of quartz, there are so many other things that are comprised of it. So when we learn how this one fundamental stone, clear quartz, works, so many other things are kind of built from that. All of the agates and the jaspers, things like tiger's eye, things like chalcedony, aventurine. These are stones that are just made of quartz. So when we really learn that fundamental unit cell and its applications, we can spread that out over many different iterations of the same stone.
And also in closing, too, Nicholas, I wanted to touch on this for a little bit. We talk about diamond, and you say, as above, so below. We also think about perfection. A diamond, we always want it perfect. And we also think about its natural reflection of, a lot of times people say it's what I want to attain to. It's where I need to get. It's something that's, it's like out there, and everybody wants to have it. We always think of diamonds, they're very expensive. It's the quest, How many can you attain to be able to feel that you have reached it, you're successful, and everything's in perfection? They always want a perfect diamond, and sometimes people will say, heaven is perfection. You're free of all of your human afflictions. You don't have to live in this world anymore. You're done with it, finally, And they think of the light and the dark, the yin and the yang kind of idea. Can you share with diamond how it would interact? And is it a diamond-like stone that you're talking about? Or are you talking about an actual diamond? And then do we have to run out and find something in perfection, right?
Right. So, in the sense of the geology behind the chapter, I'm referring to actual diamonds. Now, diamonds are much more plentiful than the jewelry industry wants us to believe, and they control that on purpose to maintain the artificial value of these stones. There are ways that we can work around that. In the chapter, you're going to find a whole bunch of diamond substitutes, some of which are naturally occurring, some are synthetic, some resemble diamonds a whole lot, and some only superficially. But they give you ways to sort of access the blueprint of diamonds that will be much nicer on your wallet. It's not quite the same thing as working with actual therapeutic quality diamonds, but use the tools that are available to you. And when all else fails, connect to diamonds on the spiritual plane. But diamond is sometimes called the king of gems. Its name also comes from Greek adamas, which means the unconquerable or the invincible. Because as the hardest of all naturally occurring gems that we've found so far, at least, it is the most difficult to carve, to crack. It is the stone that, in fact, is used to carve others. And it is this imperviability that is a representation of what happens when we connect to divine love.
Right.
Divine love conquers all. We like to say true love conquers all, but what is true love? It's not necessarily romantic or platonic. It's not necessarily personal. It is transpersonal. It is the glue that holds the universe together. It is the love from the divine. And The diamond is the perfect embodiment of that. When we look at the structure of the most common shape of diamond crystals, they form these little octahedrons. Imagine you have a four-sided pyramid and another four-sided pyramid stuck base to base. And so they literally make the outline of something that is just above as it is below. It is that occult axiom in physical form through its crystal lattice. And when we really tap into how that love transforms us and makes us, in a sense, invisible, it will lead human consciousness to the brink of enlightenment. It's this tool of illumination. And diamond, of all the stones in the book, is also the one that has the most regular and perfect composition. And when we look at that sort of perfect crystallinity that it's got, that level of organization can help us see into the fabric out of which the entire universe is woven. So that's where we initiate all changes, and we accept that we are inherently connected to the divine. We are not separable from it. In fact, we are the perfect embodiments of it. We just kind of have to look at things through a new lens to see that perfection instead of focusing on the fault.
Right, because once you get into that connection, there's no going back. You don't go back to your old ways. You don't go back to the old stuff because it just doesn't exist anymore. Once you're in that frequency, once you're in that space, once you have locked into that moment, that's the I am time. That is, it just is. There isn't any other words for it. But you certainly don't go back to the other ways. I think the idea today, Nicholas, when we were talking about your book, The Seven Archetypal Stones, and their spiritual powers and teachings, what we're really talking about is stories, connections, how we can form and see how our life is going forward and connect to some gemstones. Here's a question in closing, Nicholas, is how do we find stones of the quality that is best for us? I'll go to these stores. I've got one here in New Orleans, you can go in, stones range from 15 cents all the way up to $15,000, Do you have to find something that's more expensive? Do you need to find something that's on the internet that's better? How do you connect or choose a stone?
Well, that's definitely a loaded question. And I
know.
I think the stone required for everyone's practice will be tailored to their practice. In a perfect world where money was no object and the really sad but real dangers and terrible things that we do to human beings and to the earth for the mining process, if we could take all that stuff out of the equation, then of course we'd want to work with the highest quality gemstones, those that are the most pure, because they have the most laser-like of energies and influences. Large, perfect diamonds aren't in everybody's budget. Large, perfect emeralds aren't in everybody's budget. So, I think the best thing we can do is seek to open our hearts to have sincere dialogue with the stones. And if we come from that space, we're going to be naturally drawn to the stones that are appropriate for us. And in the beginning, that might mean those inexpensive tumbled stones. I'd still get a ton of those because they're so practical. They're easy to carry. They're easy to use. They're things that I could give away or bury in the earth or do whatever I need to do with them without, feeling like I've maybe misappropriated some funds by giving away a very expensive mineral specimen. But, on the other hand, as my practice grows, I really like to have those really refined tools that I can maybe do deeper, faster, more efficient work with on a bigger scale. But everybody's practice is different. So find the tools that are good for where you're at. Do that without judgment. I think we have to have, as a community, the hard conversations about how and why and where our stones are sourced from. The mining industry is not always doing great things to Mother Earth, although there are some really conscientious buyers and sellers and miners out there. So there are ways that we can channel our energies and our monies into supporting those practices. Lots of times, by the time we get to a metaphysical story, they just don't know. Ask anyway. See what you can do to find out. Look for stones that are, generally speaking, untreated. Those that have undergone treatments may or may not be of therapeutic value, depending on the type of treatment. And then, also look for things that are accurately represented. There are a lot of stones that are sold under new and exciting names for many times their value. I could give you a piece of granite for a few pennies, or I could sell you a rebranded piece of granite for 1,000 times that price.
Right.
So, and there's a lot of that happening on the market as well. So just do your best to build a relationship not only with the stones, but your sources. And as we do that, I think it lifts us all up.
Isn't it also, too, about your intention? In other words, when we work even, with people, do we just drive towards the clients that can pay your, $10,000 a day price? Or do we go to those who have nothing to pay for and don't even ask for much, and we're able to offer to them? So in other words, the same thing with gemstones is that they are all around the pyramid. They have all kinds of frequencies. They have all kinds of pricing. But also, too, it's about our intention. We help everyone and we do everything and we form the connections. So maybe it's more about our energy. Can we rise up our energy? Can we connect with whatever energy is there? But we can also, too, rise up by, connecting and doing the work. Isn't that really the purpose of it? Tools are always tools, but also, too, it's us that has to do the work, right?
It is. Crystals are catalysts. They don't do the work for us.
Right.
If we look at things from a maybe more science-based perspective, that catalyst is something that lowers the amount of energy or effort required to produce an outcome. But if you have a pure catalyst versus one that's really muddy with lots of other ingredients in there, those give you two different sets of results. And that's the difference between having a gem quality stone and one that's not gem quality. So yes, our consciousness is a vital part of this. And certainly if we are evolved enough, we don't need the catalyst. But
right.
I bet that most people walking around the planet just aren't at that level. And that's why we have tools like the mineral kingdom. That's why the plant and animal kingdoms are here. That's why the spiritual kingdoms are present to assist us.
Right. So if you need to start opening up the conversation with the gemstone and you've read your book and you said, I love a piece of lapis, whatever shows up for you, it showed up. Honor it. Have an engagement with it. It doesn't matter if it's 20 cents. If that's what you've got in your pocket, then that's what it needs to be. It's about the conversation and about being able to be aware. And I think it's really kind of cool, Nicholas, when you share so much information about these few stones. You don't need to have a million collections. If you just find one piece and that's what your connection is for today, then that's what it is, yes?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big proponent of really simple work with our stones. Throughout the book, you're going to find these little exercises, meditations, healing practices, where oftentimes you only need one example of a stone to do that work. And it's more meditatively based. It's not necessarily about making elaborate grids and layouts with hundreds or thousands of stones. It's about engaging in authentic relationship with the tools that you've got. And that can often go farther than, the big showy things. Although the big showy things are nice, don't get me wrong.
Yeah, because if anyone finds a bathtub that's made out of lapis, dial me up. It's sort of like I want to just bathe in its energy, Well, I think it's really cool, Nicholas, and I thank you so much for joining us today, because sometimes people will say, I'm not really kind of sure about this. It seems a little weird, it's a little out there, but wouldn't you just hey, that's kind of cool, I'll put it in my pocket, and then you find yourself on a different journey, and that's what it's all about, is opening up a journey to our thoughts and our beliefs, yes?
Sure.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Can you share with the listeners how to find out more information about your work and your other books? That'd be great.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you for having me on air. It's been a pleasure to chat. If anyone's interested in picking up my books, they're available everywhere books are sold, so please go find your local independent bookstore, support the small businesses. You can find me on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and all the other great places, too. If you'd like to find me personally, you can visit my website at www.theluminouspearl.com or, search for me on my publisher's website at innertraditions.com.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It was such a pleasure, and have a great day.
You as well. Thank you.
Thank you. If you'd like more information about Nicholas Pearson's new book, the book is The Seven Archetypal Stones, Their Spiritual Powers and Teachings. Please do click on the link on the bottom of today's show page to go directly to his website and be able to say, does this feel good? Do I feel any connection to this stone? Maybe I'll think about it. And you'll say, this stone kind of drew me to it. Kind of cool. Check out his book. You never know. There's a lot of history, a lot of stories in there. Maybe something you're missing or you were seeking in your spiritual meditation or your life, and you're saying, really looking for this connection. All of a sudden, the stone will find its way to you. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is Dr. Jeanette Gallagher, and until tomorrow, have a great day.
Today we discussed many life-changing concepts. Who do you turn to, and how do you know what is best when faced with a health crisis? Dr. Jeanette is a patient advocate. She listens to the patient, the doctors, and the family, clarifies the health issues and concerns, then helps the patient make the best choices going forward. If you would like help implementing change into your life and health, we can talk and see where you are stuck and how to improve the quality of your life. Check the link on the bottom of today's show page or visit drjeanettegallagher.com to schedule a phone appointment today.